So the next piece of power tool equipment you're going to want to have is a miter saw. So with the miter saw, what we're going to be doing is taking a lot of especially our hardwood pieces, and cutting them into certain lengths. Okay, so our door boards, our face frame, if we do a face frame. So face frame would have hardwood. It's basically a hardwood frame, and you're going to be cutting those boards to length. We almost never cut anything to width with a miter saw because it can only cut certain width boards. So maybe 5 inches, depending upon if you have a standard 10-inch model. So a couple things to consider when you're talking about miter saws or thinking about purchasing one. Most miter saws, at least when we're talking about cabinet building here, it's always just going to be straight cuts or slight angled cuts. Almost always straight cuts though. So you don't need a sliding compound miter saw. And so there's differences between, there's a bevel and the compound, right? So you hear things like a dual bevel or compound, right? So it really depends on whether your saw can swing in multiple directions, or if it only swings one way, or if it bevels one way. So I guess I would consider the miter cut kind of to be the way it sweeps when you go from one end, from 0 degrees all the way over to 50 or 60 and back over to 45 or something like that. So that's like the miter sweep. And then there's a bevel. So the bevel is when you take the head and you tilt it one way or the other. And then there's the sliding feature. And I have a 10-inch DeWalt sliding compound miter saw, and it's a dual bevel. So the slide allows you to take just a wider board and maybe cut it across, so it kind of just increases your cutting capacity. There's nothing inherent about the sliding feature that adds tons of functionality to your saw. It's just about cutting wider boards. But for this particular build, I'm going to be using it because I have my sliding saw, but really all you need is just standard. I would get a dual bevel compound miter saw. Don't buy coleslaw. And you're looking at $200 or $300, and they're all pretty good. Most of the models that you'd find at your average hardware store or on Amazon.com or something like that will be fine for what we're going to use. So really, when it comes to miter saws and table saws, the most important thing you're going to want is a new sharp blade. And when we do work with this type of stuff, you want a very high teeth count. So when you look at a saw blade, there's going to be a teeth count. When you go actually to buy it, you're looking at two things: the diameter of the blade, and then how many teeth it has. And then sometimes it has they all have some kind of teeth pattern, whether they cross one way, or they're a triple bevel or triple chip or whatever they are. And having a sharp blade, number one, is very important for safety. You'll get cleaner cuts. You'll get better results with a sharp blade on both your table saw and your miter saw. So when we go to do this, I would advise you to replace your blades, or if you just bought them, that's fine, but make sure they're nice and sharp. And you're going to be putting a few $100, maybe a couple grand worth of parts together here. Spending $20 or $30 on a new miter saw or table saw blade is a really smart idea. So like I mentioned, the other part is the number of teeth. So the number of teeth basically is going to give you a cleaner cut, the higher number of teeth. So if you're framing out your basement, or you're doing work with 2x4s, you're building a shed, you're building a deck, then you're fine generally with lower count teeth. So what's lower count teeth? Like something like in the 20, 24, 30 teeth range. When you start getting into cabinet work and you want real clean cuts and you're working with expensive plywood, we could be working with plywood that's $100 a sheet, maybe more. And you cut with a 24 count tooth blade, you're going to have a lot more because the wood's going to fray a little more. It's going to split a little more. So if you have a 90 tooth count or an 80 tooth count blade, you're going to have much, much cleaner cuts. So when you push through, and you may have done this before if you've ever worked with, if you started out with woodworking and you chop through with a miter saw, and sometimes you see all that little hair on the back side of your saw. It could be from two things. Number one is your saw isn't sharp enough, and also there's maybe just not enough teeth. The other thing is you have to go a little slower when you cut through it. But so that's what I tell you about the miter saw is any basic entry-level chop saw will be fine. You probably want to get that extra features, at least a dual bevel, the compound, because it just gets it's easier when you start doing crown molding. If you're planning on adding crown molding to your cabinets, having that extra bevel on side to side gives you more versatility in what you can cut, and so that's a smart investment. My saw costs $400, I want to say, and that's pretty much as expensive as it gets, to $400 or $500, and then you get into a whole other level of miter saw stuff with like Festool and some other brands. But DeWalt, Makita, Hitachi, all those basic miter saws are going to be fine for this particular cabinet building course.